Cool. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Apologies, getting a little late on. I installed a new version of Zoom, which sent my computer screeching to a halt. So here we are, and you get this wonderful portrait view of me from my phone, which is great because we'll be talking about differences in portrait and landscape and all sorts of fun things creative wise today. So appreciate everybody kind of taking the time to be here with us and talk kind of through everything. So today we're going to be talking basically about maximizing your creative and winning at automated advertising. Going to find ways that you can boost up your campaigns. We're going to look at like testing and measuring creative success. We're going to look at the kind of performance trends. We're going to see how we can leverage video, optimize our creatives, design for cross-channel success, and eventually just kind of get there to a Q&A portion. So I got a lot of good stuff on deck for you kind of today. As far as who's in the room, I have already kind of introduced myself as Captain Computer Problems, but Chris Apaliski, Senior Director of Paid Social here at Adlucent, and I am joined with some absolutely amazing people, but I will not do them as justice as they would themselves. So Abby and Breanna, if you would like to introduce yourselves, I think that'd be great.
Sure thing. Hey there, I'm Abby Kaplan. I'm Head of Creative here at Adlucent.
And I'm Breanna Simpson. I'm an Integrated Strategy Lead here at Adlucent.
Awesome. So, very, very qualified, very technical, very awesome people today. As far as who we are at Adlucent, if you didn't know, we are Google's largest shopping ads agency. We run the entire gambit, search, social, a lot of paid media and advertising. Have a handful of clients, a lot of things flowing through the industry. So you can see some of our clients here. I don't need to read necessarily all the names, but you can see that we spend a lot of time in this sort of thing, and digital is what we do. It's definitely our bread and butter. So Angela, I believe, I don't know if you're talking, you're on your, or somebody was going to talk about the poll here. I can.
Hey everyone. Yep.
There we go.
Here we go.
All right. Nice little poll. Are you planning new creatives for Performance Max? Kind of interested to see how this is going to be answered for sure. So looking forward to kind of what sort of results we'll get here. PMAX is kind of a hot topic, as you know, these days, or at least if you're around these parts. So.
All right, Chris, we'll give it a couple more of a sec, and then we will launch the results. What do you guys think it's going to be?
I think it depends on disciplines, right? Like I think what your discipline of focus is depends on how familiar you are with PMAX kind of thing. So I'm actually very interested to see what these kind of results are. Lets me know if my social peeps are on the call or not.
Well, here we go. Let's launch those results.
Okay, look at that. So about 33% of participants say what is Performance Max, which so now I know about a third of them are my social audience. So we'll get into it for sure. Breanna has an entire section on it, and don't worry, for those of you that are launching PMAX campaigns, we've got some great results for you and great suggestions. So before we get into that, though, I do want to just kind of briefly touch on this first part here, which is testing and measuring creative success, right? It's really important. We talk a lot about the need to test and the need to learn and how you do this sort of thing. So I kind of want to look really quickly into kind of this whole beta typing strategy. So if you look into the next slide here, we can see kind of what like a typical test and learn plan really looks like, right? So what you've got here is a strategy where you're running things into kind of like a sandbox environment, right? And you're testing from campaigns and you're seeing where you can go with them, and then you form a hypothesis basically, and from that hypothesis, you try and say like, what kind of things am I trying to learn here? You make your creative, you learn from your winners, whatever KPIs you're tracking towards, and then you adapt and you move along. So you take your winners from your A/B testing, your multivariate testing, however you really want to do that sort of thing, and you throw it in your evergreen campaigns, learn from those, and then kind of keep testing and learning, rinsing and repeating. To kind of highlight on that just a little bit more, if you go to the next slide here, we can see what something like this would look like in a prospecting campaign, right? So, the important thing to talk about here is it's about like marrying your data and machine learning with also like that human touch and automation, right? So automation is certainly what we're talking about here, and machines are super important, but it's also to know that like there's typically human beings behind these sort of things. Obviously, we all have jobs for now. It's like looking at your different objectives, marrying your media executions and those types of objectives with your creatives, looking at your audience strategy, making sure all your data is pixeled, throwing this in with your creative, testing and learning, kind of taking what insights that you have and again, A/B testing or multivariate testing. So whether we're testing, 2 separate pieces of creative or 2 or 3 things or even 4, running in, getting your results, tracking, iterating, and optimizing. And then eventually this leads to kind of acquiring new customers. So I know that this is like a really high level, like, thanks, let's test and learn. I think we all know that, but this at least kind of takes us through where we're going there. Of course, I don't want to just kind of talk about all this in theory, so I'm going to hand this over to Abby, who's going to kind of take us through basically an end-to-end example here.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So here I will walk us through an example of what the creative process can look like here at Adlucent. If you want to go to the next slide. In this example, we're reviewing a creative campaign for an Adlucent client, and we've anonymized them here for the webinar, and we'll be calling the retailer and brand these made-up names, Medical Love and Sealy's, just for this demo. And we'll focus specifically on the YouTube data. As you can see in this overview page here, the Adlucent team designed this cross-channel creative test to figure out whether this client would have better results with feature-oriented copy or with language focused more on generic branding. So the intent of showing this whole process is to give you an idea of how you can use the same set of photography and assets kind of across the full campaign, whether you're shooting specifically for your campaign or just pulling from the collection you have available. This will make it the most efficient and kind of get the most out of your creatives. So just a few call outs from this page. You can see through this 2-week test, we saw over a 50% increase in YouTube revenue, ROAS, and orders. And on the next slide, I have an example here of just some of the pertinent discovery questions that you might ask either your internal creative team or it's something you can delve into with your agency. So everyone is kind of aligned on your KPIs and getting your company and campaign goals all together here. Questions like this can guide your hypotheses and keep everyone kind of on like aligning to the same ideas and keeping everything consistent throughout your campaign. And on the next slide, our performance creative team always starts our projects kicking off with our creative brief. So we'll cover things like objectives, audience, tone, positioning, deliverables, scope, and timeline, as you can see here. And once again, that kind of keeps everybody on the same page. Next slide. So the hypothesis for this campaign was to test features-oriented copy versus generic. And next slide. So I just wanted to share some of the creative process and deliverables. This mood board kind of would set the theme and palette for the design and animation choices that we were going to make for our YouTube video we were designing for this campaign. And once everyone on the client and agency side kind of get together on one aesthetic, we move on to, on the next slide, the storyboarding process. So for this, we kind of just go frame by frame and show like the stills and explain underneath like what we would animate for each thing. And we're showing our A/B test here with that same hypothesis I had mentioned before. So this is the features-oriented copy. And then on our next slide, we have our more general branding approach. And so those were kind of what the videos were going to look like, and then we could run them against each other. So on the next slide, we put together this video using a combination of just the still photos that the client provided us, as well as animation effects that we put together on the agency side. And this is shown in our YouTube layout, but we also made variations in social sizes. So we'll play that video. And so, of course, we did run 2 different versions of this, but we're just showing one for this example here. And you can see that this was made with still photos, but we created some motion by like moving them across, and then a lot of typographic animations and adding that music really brings everything to life, regardless of whether you're able to do a full production video or just this kind of lightweight approach. And so on the next page, we also ran the same A/B test here with social ads. So we've got the same imagery and just testing that copy again. And then the next slide will show you the same sort of approach here in our display ads. And just something to call out is like a lot of the display ads are in pretty vastly different layouts. So it's important to kind of think about how you're going to crop your images to make them effective across these different sizes, kind of like how Chris is in a vertical layout and we are in a horizontal layout, as we mentioned before. So on the next slide, I will hand things back over to Breanna, and she'll go over kind of how the YouTube test results looked and what it all meant to us.
Thanks, Abby. So based on the creative test that we won for variation A, again, that being the features copy ad, and variation B, the more generic branding ad, we saw the following results. And what really is important to us for this specific test, and if you recall the hypothesis that we were using, which message resonates better with our remarketing audience, remarketing is much lower in the funnel. So instead of focusing on impressions and views or view through rate, really what we wanted to, what the metrics we used to determine the winner for this specific creative test related more to orders, revenue, conversion rate, and ROAS. So you can see here from the highlighted cells that for variation A, we were able to receive more clicks, more orders at a higher revenue with a higher conversion rate and a much higher ROAS than variation B, and a lower cost per acquisition or cost per order. So it was really exciting, and that's the process that we used to determine our winner as it related again back to our goal and KPI and the hypothesis of the test. But I also wanted to bring attention to the kind of view through rate. If we were to treat all metrics the same, you're not ever going to be able to determine a great winner because not all metrics always perform the same. And so it's really important to have that tie-in when you're doing creative testing to what the overall goal of the campaign is and what you're hoping to understand better from creative. Because had we wanted to get more views, we may have continued to test longer, extended the time frame from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to normalize data better and to determine if the view through rate we were seeing for creative variation B was actually what we should have been using if we were focusing on more of an awareness focused campaign. So, determining our winner, looking at all of our metrics, and where do we go from here? So on the next slide, we have some examples. So this was a messaging test, as Abby kind of laid out, but there are a ton of other options that you can test on, and creative should always be an iterative process. You're always looking to get to that final best solution, but from there, where do you go? And kind of continuing on that life cycle of creative testing. So we have kind of messaging set, at least from features copy works better, and then we can move into testing different imagery, whether lifestyle or catalog imagery works better. We can test, we used lightweight motion for this video. Does that prove to be successful when compared to a more produced video? And does color scheme have an effect on how an audience resonates to a specific form of creative? So those are just an example of some different tests that we would propose to do post this one. So as like next steps. In the next section, we'll cover the 4 essential creative trends that we kind of see happening in 2022. So we can go forward to the next slide. So first, I think that we highlighted sort of a YouTube example, and I think you're going to hear this a few more times throughout this presentation, that video is extremely vital. So with the rise of sort of automated campaigns, and especially with Performance Max, that is going to be sort of the premier shopping campaign type on Google paid search, the majority of these automated campaigns will include video placements. And video is going to be really important. It is an option, but what makes it even more important is that if you don't upload your own video asset for a Performance Max campaign, Google has the option to create one for you and have that run in that placement. So it's really in your best interest to have a video asset created. And I think we will go through some additional ways in the next section on how to really use like lightweight motion if you don't have the budget or the time to have it produced video. Secondly, for creative trends, the organization of your assets is really important. So we're going to talk about sort of this ideology of having creative be consistent cross-channel as well. And that's really important with automated campaigns that are becoming more creative focused. And as they continue to ramp up and this becomes more of a trend, having the right assets to combine in these placements is really essential to create cohesive campaigns that convert. And you'll want to be able to have all of that easily accessed so that if you need to make a switch across all of your different channels, it kind of flows through together so you have more of that consistent messaging. The third kind of trend that we see as being really important for 2022 and beyond is this ideology of your first party data and using that to inform your strategy, to inform your creative. And so we all know that there have been a lot of data tracking changes, especially with iOS changes in the past year. And so now, your marketing creative has to work smarter and harder than it ever has before. And so you really need to have a good way to ingest first party data so that you have additional levers to look at to determine optimization and success. So one of the things that we'll talk about much later in the presentation is Adlucent Index and how we're able to use this first party data to better inform not only bidding algorithms, but sort of this philosophy of how you can also iterate on your creative. And lastly, the fourth trend that we see is accessible or user-generated content on social. So authentic advertising experiences definitely go a long way to building brand trust, but more often than not, these authentic advertising experiences are not in the form of an ad, but they're more in the form of something that looks more native, like user-generated content. And UGC itself acts as a signal to these potential buyers, helping them make their purchase decision because they have trust with the people that have created the content and not necessarily, coming directly from a brand and being forced to, take that at face value. But another really great thing about UGC is it's also a cost-efficient way to test into these different types of creative without breaking the bank, obviously. So those are some trends that we see happening in 2022. And as I mentioned, we'll hit on various portions of them throughout this presentation. But I'll go ahead and pass it back to Abby, who will dig deeper into the video section and talk about leveraging video without full service production.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned previously in that cross-channel campaign example, you don't have to have completely custom assets or full video production capabilities to make compelling video content for your ad channels. Next slide. So here in a moment, we'll show an animated video that was from a client of Adlucent, Mercari. This uses slightly more complex animation. I wanted to show a little bit of a different example than we showed with those still images before, but it still focuses on kind of catalog images and creates an exciting storyline and eye-catching visuals without obviously having to do a full production video that's specific to this campaign. And so it gives you a lot more options. Video is so important, and there's more than one way to do it.
Goodbye, sketchy local classifieds. Hello, selling with Mercari Local. Easily tap your way to scheduled pickups and door-to-door deliveries by our trusted local partners. Mercari Local, local selling reimagined.
Awesome. So instead of having to pay basically tens of thousands of dollars every time you need a video produced by shooting like a whole custom video, there's definitely a lower barrier to entry when it comes to either lightweight motion or just animated videos like these, and as well as the user-generated content and accessible video that Breanna had mentioned in the trend section. So all of these are good options to get you into video if you feel kind of like overwhelmed by how big it would be to make a whole video with full production. So next slide. I think Angela is getting ready to ask us a question. Is that right? There we go.
Yeah, so we had a few questions that are coming in on the chat and QA. So please continue to send those in. We do have one that I wanted to throw at you. So it looks like for video campaigns, the campaigns with the higher ad rank, whether YouTube or Google Performance Max will show. Does that mean they have access? Does that mean they access the same inventory, or do they access to different inventory? Breanna, you want to take that one?
Yeah, definitely. And this kind of goes perfectly. I'll cover this in the next section that we're about to get to. But to answer your question, YouTube and Performance Max show across some of the same inventory, but not all of the same inventory. So for Performance Max, it really shows on the YouTube in-stream, your YouTube home and search pages. But YouTube standalone campaigns have a variety of other placements that they're eligible to serve for, depending on the campaign type that you choose. So there are additional placements that exist in like YouTube TV, for instance, and across other YouTube sources that aren't going to be eligible for with your standalone Performance Max campaigns, which is why it's not recommended at this time that you have like Performance Max replace your YouTube campaigns. Any other questions?
Thanks, Breanna. Not at this point, but we are continuing to monitor. Great.
All right, and that brings us next to our optimizing creatives for Performance Max. So on the next slide, we'll kind of go high level into what Performance Max is for that 33% of the group here that doesn't really know what Performance Max is, and definitely want to talk a little bit about the timeline. So we've kind of alluded to this transition of creative heavy automated campaigns. Performance Max is definitely the premier kind of buzzworthy campaign that's coming out from Google right now that has to do with that. And the timeline to transition really is affecting the old shopping campaigns, smart shopping campaigns will be automatically migrated to Performance Max. And the goal from Google is that will happen by September or right before Q4 of this year. So essentially how it differs it's very similar to smart shopping. It just has some extra bells and whistles that smart shopping doesn't have. So on paper, it is a goal-based campaign, and it is going to replace smart shopping for sure. It uses a variety of automated visual and feed-based signals. So, your products from your feed, images that you upload, and it really uses these assets to extend the reach outside of the shopping results on the SERP and the shopping tab to get more incremental value or get more incremental conversions or whatever your goal for your campaign is. It does have the ability to optimize for both online and offline conversions. And the targeting and formats are based on conversion goals that are set at a campaign or account level. So previously you could only really optimize towards account level conversions. And now with Performance Max, you have a little bit more ability to get more tailored to the conversions that you assign to your Performance Max campaigns. So in the next sort of portion, like what's new, how does this differ from, previous shopping campaigns, but specifically smart shopping campaigns? There's additional inventory and formats. So Performance Max has the ability to serve a dynamic search ad. It can also serve an ad on the Discover feed and YouTube in-stream, which wasn't available in Smart Shopping. And with those new formats, there are some additional bidding and control levels, as well as insight and reporting available. So you can optimize towards a CPA goal versus with Smart Shopping, it was only TROAS. And for controls, you have the ability to create multiple asset groups and add audience signals to your campaigns to improve performance. And you can also set up those conversion value rules that I was talking about, as well as optimize your campaigns towards a new customer acquisition goal. And on the insights and reporting front, Google has been able to introduce some new options for advertisers, which is a search trends report, an audience insights report, asset insights, and consumer interest insights. So very exciting additional levers and information that you'll be able to get that I know historically was really difficult to understand with your smart shopping campaigns. And all of those kind of new things are just additional optimization levers that help you with management. So the addition of creative, you now have additional levers to test and determine, your asset groups and ad strength. You can add those audience signals and test different audiences. You can dig into performance a little more granularly than you have been able to with smart shopping. And again, you can have different campaigns optimized towards different goals. So there's a few more levers available for optimization. But most importantly, on this next slide, what Google and what we found through all of our research and conversations is that creative assets are going to be one of the most important ways to optimize Performance Max results. And really where these assets differ from smart shopping, I have this kind of laid out on the following slide. It's with the introduction of that Discover feed, which is very heavily created. That's where one of the big differences comes in. So with regular smart shopping, you were kind of running on your search inventory, your third-party display, owned and operated display from Google, which includes Gmail, YouTube search, and the home feed. But now you're adding in the Discover feed and YouTube in-stream with Performance Max, which brings in new ad formats and just provides more areas to test for you. And so we have outlined on the following slide some things to keep in mind, some best practices as it comes to creative for your Performance Max campaigns. So from a text perspective, you really want to craft messaging that has a consistent theme for it. And I'll kind of cover this additionally on the following slide, like how important grouping things by theme is going to be. But crafting messages that has a consistent theme that should be able to be combined and make sense when combined is going to be very important for your Performance Max campaigns to succeed. Another important text guideline to keep in mind as well is you want to make sure that you're highlighting information about your product offerings. So Performance Max isn't a replacement for your discovery campaign or any of these other heavily creative campaign types. It's still primarily a shopping campaign when a product feed is connected. And so you want to make sure that you're tying your product offerings into your text assets as well. And lastly, kind of what I'll cover for the text guideline portion is only capitalize the first word in proper nouns for a more authentic ad experience. So make it look less like an ad, feel more native to the platform. Those are some best practices to keep in mind when it comes to crafting your text. For images, it's recommended that you use the maximum number of image slots available in an asset group to be eligible for all of the inventory. And that will really provide Google to use those additional images that you have to go into additional placements to get that incremental revenue, which is the whole point of these goal-based campaigns. From an imagery perspective, using authentic, high quality images that inspire engagement are always preferred over using, ones that don't necessarily do that. And on a product imagery front, if you do go the route and you have to opt into using that Google generated video, for instance, you want to make sure that your products use consistent backgrounds and orientations, so that there's at least consistency on the feed front as well. And lastly, for performance creative best practices for video as it relates, and we've talked about how important video is, and it's really important that the video assets you do create are aligned to your brand guidelines and messaging. So again, keeping that consistent experience across your other channels, but also across your brand as well. And it's really in your best interest, if you can't have a fully produced video, to utilize lightweight motion or lo-fi video assets whenever possible. And you want to make sure that you're grabbing attention early and introducing branding as early and frequently as possible to kind of stick to, that this is a brand and an ad, and you want to make sure that you're including your brand as much as possible. And again, just honing on to this fact, because in Google, when you're creating this campaign, it's in italics and it's a very small font. Videos will be automatically created if you don't upload an asset. Not having one does not opt you out of that placement. They'll just automatically create a video using different images. So really important to take away from here, some of these creative best practices, but there are some additional tools that you can use in the UI that I've kind of outlined on the next slide. Cool. So for some additional thoughts here, during the creation process of an asset group, there's an ad strength indicator that exists when you're adding assets, whether they be text or image or video based. It'll give you sort of an early readout into if this will be successful or if there's optimizations that you can make even in the creation process. Getting back to kind of what I mentioned earlier, grouping things by themes. So this is really important when you have all of these different creative assets that can maybe kind of relate and maybe not all look great together, but you want to make sure that you're grouping your text, image, video, audience, product kind of all together thematically for the best results, to kind of keep that consistent messaging across every asset that exists in an asset group for these types of campaigns. One feature that also exists, if you do struggle to have creative available for your brand, Google has this option to scan your website for images, and will even allow you to enter the URL for your Facebook and Instagram accounts, and I think other social media accounts, to scan those websites for images as well to be used in Google campaigns. So if you don't have, you haven't done your asset organization great, and there's assets that exist on social that you kind of want to easily pull over, you do have that availability through the scan website for images offer. And keeping in mind that, like other forms of creative, this isn't a set it and forget it. There should be a cycle that comes with adjusting creative for Performance Max campaigns as well. So going through the producing of assets, launching them, measuring results, and then analyzing performance and using that to inform your new asset creation and then launch. So keeping all of this in mind really should set you up for success on Performance Max. I know it's a new campaign type. There's a lot of new things going on, but we have kind of combed through a lot of the information and tried to give as much direction as possible as it relates to creative for Performance Max. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Chris to cover designing creative for cross-channel success.
Cool. Thank you so much, Breanna. I think this is really important because we talk about all the different types of creatives, and then you look at different platforms, or you look at different ways that your ads can show up, and you realize that well, they all have different best practices. We see this a lot if somebody on social, especially, right? If they design a square image, for example, or video, and then they try and throw it in stories or TikTok or something that has a vertical placement, that these suddenly your objectives are lost, right? So it's important that you make sure that you're optimizing the best you can for cross-channel, right? Like if you look in terms of PMAX and everything we're talking about, you've got display network, Gmail, YouTube, Discovery, everything kind of in one campaign. And as I mentioned on a omni-channel kind of strategy on social, you see it in different channels, right? So you want to make sure that we're creating cohesion across your channels and that you're kind of running campaigns across all channels as possible. So wanted to kind of just dive a little bit moving forward into some of these best practices. So while you can keep these in mind while you're designing your creative. Facebook, I mean, and we'll talk about it on the next slide, video is certainly king, but there are times where you want to be using static ads. So, you know, a lot of this, it means more visuals, less text. You want to make sure that it's consistent. It shouldn't have to be said that you should be using high res images, but just in case, please make sure you're using high res images. You know, you want it to be as clear as possible. And it's important to kind of have people in there, right? You want to see them using your product. You know, if you're selling, you know, handbags, a person smiling is one thing, but a person smiling and actually making use of the handbag is a totally different thing. Carousel ads, obviously you want to make sure that you've got all the components. Carousels are great for like storytelling. They're really, really great sometimes in that like lower funnel kind of capacity, right? Where we want somebody to kind of take an image or take an action. So we want to make sure that our images are cohesive. We want to make sure that they're engaging. We want to make sure that like they're enticing people to click and that they're going, that you understand what the product is, you understand what the service is, and you understand how it's featured in each card of the carousel. If we move on, excuse me, to the next slide, then we kind of go along to video. This is a super big deal to me. Certainly we want to design for mobile first in mind always on social, with the exception of LinkedIn and Reddit, who have pretty decent you know, desktop rates. Somewhere like Facebook, for example, which we're talking about here, has absolutely predominantly mobile rates, right? So if you're not designing for mobile, then you're already, you know, like losing the game there. And if you're doing stories or reels or something, like I mentioned, you want to design, you know, for a vertical placement because that's how people are looking at it, right? So this is where it's going to kind of keep the most attention there. Attention spans are, well, they are what they are in 2022. So you really have about 3 seconds to capture attention. So you want to make sure that you're doing it where you're hitting them right with your messaging. You want to make sure that your brand identity is showcased early. And people should be able to understand what your ad is with the sound off. A lot of people have sound off on their phone, so do not rely on sound. Make sure that you're designing for sound off. Collections and instant experiences are important, right? Instant experiences are these immersive units on social where, you know, somebody can kind of dive in. They're really great in prospecting campaigns. And, you know, the thing about these is that you want to make sure that you're using it for a storytelling. So you want to have like a cover photo, you want to capture attention. Facebook's going to kind of dynamically select where you're going and it's going to show how your products appear. So make sure that you're doing this, make sure that you're using product imagery for your retargeting. But if you're prospecting, you know, you're still kind of like getting in there. So you want like a lifestyle image and those sort of things going. We can move on to other platforms for sure. TikTok, obviously, big thing these days. Vertical video, same kind of thing. Obviously, do not try anything horizontal or landscape on TikTok. Make sure you're using hashtags. There's kind of an organic feel to TikTok, so you almost don't want it to be too overproduced. You see this a lot with you know, user-generated and influencer content, or even the micro influencer on TikTok. So I think it's pretty important that we're using that and lean into trends and make sure that, you know, like if trend sees that moment, you know, use it, but make sure that it kind of ties into your brand. And obviously be consistent when you're posting on TikTok and post often. We can move on to display and discovery. High quality images, again, high quality is no matter what. You want to make sure that people are able to see and understand your product. Overlays, not great on display or discovery ads. So don't really use them, whether it's text or logos or CTA buttons or anything of that nature. Try not to use collages and try not to make everything all white in display or discovery so it doesn't really blend in. If we move along to Amazon, also a favorite at the Apaliski household here, you know, same thing, we see some of these trends, as you can see. Your creative should be short and should work with the sound off, right? You want to show your brand logos early. You want to make sure you're featuring one product and you have minimal text. And don't try and throw the URLs in there. If you throw the URLs, Amazon's going to tell you, get out of here. It's going to auto reject them. So do not do that. As far as branding, make sure that your headline is relevant. Make sure your logos are custom and consistent. You want to obviously understand kind of who your consumers are and what they're going to respond to. And make sure that, like, you know, capitalizations. I can't stress this enough because it's like, you know, it goes. I'm a little bit of a, you know, stickler for grammar and punctuation. So, like, please, like, capitalizations, make sure they're consistent. If you're doing it one way, do it the entire way. And lastly, we can talk about YouTube, which is everybody's favorite time suck in America, right? So you have the opening to attract people, and you want to make sure that you've got somebody in a tight frame, that, you know, in the first 5 seconds, your shots are intriguing, that you captured their info. You're going to notice a recurring theme here, that you want to introduce the brand quickly. So people should understand what the brand is, what your logos are, reinforce it as you move throughout. You want to make sure that you're calling out kind of like any emotion, kind of capture people, right? Like YouTube has like that like TV kind of quality to it in a way. So you want to make sure that you're playing through with that. And then obviously you want to be direct, right? So if there's an offer, have your CTA be compelling. You want to make sure that that person who's watching your ad, before they, you know, watch their cat video or somebody fall off a bike, you can obviously tell what I watch on YouTube now, that they want to go click on your ad, right? And they want to go buy your product if that is the end goal. So make sure you're enticing them to kind of take that action. With that, that is my spiel there. So I will actually pass it back to Breanna now, who's going to talk about using first-party data.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so I know I mentioned this very early on, first-party data really going to be something that you should lean into if you're not already in 2022. So definitely wanted to talk about Adlucent Index and how we kind of approach using first-party data to inform bidding algorithms, and then we'll move into sort of how we use first-party data for creative as well. So Adlucent Index basically turns your data into signals that you can use for real-time bidding. So rather than bidding on clicks, you can value conversions differently and really take some of that control back. And we have some examples that I think will explain this a little bit better than just me talking about it right now. But it does work in tandem with Google's automation solutions. It's available for text ads, smart shopping, performance max, and even on Facebook as well. And one really great thing is, since it's your data, it can be fully customizable to your business goals. And as we've talked about kind of throughout this whole presentation, we definitely propose a testing structure anytime you will be using Adlucent Index or any sort of something that you want to determine if it's working. So you can run this concurrently with your other strategies, but you can have multiple testing structures as well to really determine the success. So on the next slide, it's kind of a visual of how it works. So a conversion, it comes in via, you know, your Google platform, for instance, and the information is kind of absorbed by the algorithm, and that's used to make future decisions. What Adlucent Index does is kind of gets in the middle of that action happening and provides additional context, additional data to better inform the bidding algorithm. So it kind of gets between the conversion happening and then how the bidding algorithm uses that conversion. So on the next slide, we have a very specific kind of high-level example of how this could work in action. So basically, you have two orders. On the left, your order at the top here is $350. On the right, this order is also $350. And that is kind of binary. That is what would be sent back to the Google platform, for instance, once a conversion is completed. Both of these orders came in, both were $350. But when we tie our first-party data into it, we have more information. So on the left side, we can see that by tying in the first-party data, this was actually a purchase that was made at a regular price. It was full margin. This actually came from a net new customer for our business, and they also spent 10 minutes browsing another category on our website. But on the right side here, this was a sale purchase. This was an existing customer, and we know from the customer history that we have through the first party data that they only buy sale merchandise ever. And so when we're looking at these two people and say our business goal is to improve lifetime value from our shopping campaigns, we would probably value the left customer higher, and we would change the weight of that conversion to be something more like $785 versus the static $350. Conversions are conversions, and they're both still important, but when it comes to automated bidding, you want to be able to inform that algorithm as best as possible to target the people and to optimize towards the people that matter most for your business. So that's really where kind of digging into that first party data on an order level can help you take the next step to make automation work better for you. And I know we've been talking about creative. So how can we use creative and first party data in tandem? On the next slide, we kind of have an example of this. So one of our clients here, we can dig into performance for the social ads. So a person clicked on a swimwear ad, the customer comes through the site, sees this, is landed on the swimwear collection page, and ultimately, because of all the first party data you're ingesting about your customer base, you can see that they actually convert on dresses, and that's a trend. You see a lot of other interactions happening where an ad is clicked on, it's swimwear, and then they're converting on dresses. And so one of the ways that you can use all of this data to inform your creative strategy is kind of pulling out those trends, pulling out those insights from what's actually happening on your site, and using it to inform the different types of creative you're potentially launching and testing on different platforms. So if dresses and summer dresses specifically are converting really hot right now, and we're really focusing on swimwear because historically that's what's converted this time of year, maybe we should be adding some additional dress ads into the mix to better resonate with our customers and reduce the number of clicks to a conversion and perform better and get more conversions, right? So those are some couple of examples of how important first party data could be and how you can leverage that on a bidding side and on the creative side. And that kind of concludes ultimately the meat of the presentation, but I'll go ahead and pass it back to Abby to kick off the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much, Breanna. So as Breanna said, this is the end of our presentation, and we have seen y'all have asked a few questions so far. So I want to take the last few minutes to answer those. And also, if you haven't asked any questions yet, please feel free to do so, and we will answer them as well.
Okay, so we have a question that came in. As you develop mood boards, can you describe what data or signals you're using to predict what type of creative you should explore for the audience or objective outlined in the brief? Or is creative development conventional, ideated, or curated by creatives versus selected imagery or content already scored or measured by your target audience? Who would like to tackle that one?
I can take that if nobody else wants to take that. I'm happy to speak to that. I think first of all, it kind of depends on really what the objective is of your campaign. There's a degree there of really marrying your creative executions with your actual hard-coded media executions there, right? So the entire time that you get something, typically it'll start with a creative brief and you'll ideate it on that. But when you look at kind of what we were talking about before on testing and learning and hitting these media objectives, I think some of it depends on the objective of your campaign, right? And so perhaps that that you're running things on a traffic objective and landing page view rate is your North Star with your campaign. So this is where you start kind of designing based off of that. So I think there's a degree of it where creative development is kind of conventional, right? Like we mentioned, what was it like? Curated by creatives versus selecting imagery. But I think that a lot of this is stuff that you're already measuring and knowing what resonates by your audience. And if you have questions on that, the easiest way to kind of navigate through that is back to that testing strategy. So perhaps your A/B testing types of creative that work, and then you kind of go back from there, or even multivariate testing. But as long as you're hitting what your benchmark is or above it when you've set these kind of levers in place, then you should be in a good spot. So that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, awesome. And just to add on to that, kind of in the example I showed, I know Breanna was talking about kind of the next steps in iterating, like after you run a creative test. So in the case of the example mood board, we had those features call outs in like both the A and B test, and that had come from kind of previous YouTube videos that were already successful. So basically, if you have like an ongoing client where you're already kind of, or if you have an ongoing relationship with whoever's creating this mood board at this point, then you're already working off of like what has been successful and iterating from there. So unless it's completely like a net new situation, then your creative team, like on our end, we would be making kind of aesthetic decisions based on what we think is right for the brand aesthetic and what we think is right as creatives who like know the trends and what works well. And then we're also working hand in hand with that client services team and all of the account managers who are right in there in the data, and making sure that we're taking a performance creative approach where we're looking at what the data is telling us and not just, of course, aesthetics, if that helps as well.
Great. Thanks so much, team. We do have a few more questions. I know we have about 3 minutes left. So the next one is, should Google Performance Max campaigns replace any portion of existing programs?
Yeah, and I can take this one. So I know I kind of mentioned this specifically with the YouTube example, but the Performance Max campaigns are not meant to replace any standalone campaigns that use additional creative. So they will primarily, when a feed is connected, work as Performance Max plus shopping. So as primarily a shopping campaign, that should be where the majority of your spend and traffic goes. And the additional placements that are eligible and through a Performance Max campaign will be used to get incremental goals. And so when you kind of think about all of the different campaign sites that exist, like it's not going to replace your search campaigns and your discovery and YouTube and display campaigns probably have different goals that they're working towards. So it wouldn't be a right fit to replace those either. And it's definitely not recommended that you pause any other campaigns in favor of having Performance Max capture all of that traffic.
Great. All right. I think we have time for one more question. And Abby, this might be to you. If my team is working on taking photos for future campaigns and our product launches, what should we prioritize to make everything work across channels?
Okay, awesome. So yes, some of the things we mentioned before about making sure like everything works in different layouts. In the examples I walked through with the kind of cross-channel campaign, we wanted to make sure that we were showing like groups of people for this campaign and focusing on our top selling styles. But in terms of everything, working on all your different ad placements, I think the most important thing when you're setting up photo shoots that you're going to use for a variety of different placements is just making sure that you're getting angles and a variety of different images that will work in different crops. So like if you have everything up super, super close, that might not work in every single dimension, but at the same time, you don't want everything too far away. So you want to kind of have an idea, even if it's not completely worked out, of just the different layouts, like kind of what your top display sizes are going to be, are going to have like the skyscraper and a lot of like those narrow horizontals and things like that. So you want to make sure like you can show details and things that are still compelling. And for those of you who aren't maybe doing these full photo shoots and you are kind of coming from your existing asset library, you can definitely get creative with your backgrounds. You can, even if you're just using like your catalog images, you can extract your images out of the background. And I mean, as you can see in our little Zoom backgrounds here, like you don't have to have the photography and the perfect paradise background. Like you can get really creative with how you're going to show those products.
Right. I think that's about it. Abby, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I think if you have any follow-up questions, we can, Angela, is there like a a follow-up situation or?
Yeah, we will send an email with the video that you can share, and we will have it available on demand and for additional viewing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.